150 feet above the inferno, smoke blinding, winds hammering at 90 miles per hour, and Captain RK Smithley was about to drop 85,000 pounds of retardant while threading his 182-foot aircraft through a canyon at 170 miles per hour, maneuvers that would qualify as an emergency descent if passengers were aboard. The DC-10's altitude warning screamed, "Altitude! Altitude!" but there was no turning back. Below, flames towered 60 feet high. Ground crews were trapped, and this 420,000-pound converted airliner was their only hope. January 7th, 2025. Los Angeles. Two words that should never appear together. January. Wildfire. Yet, at 10:30 a.m., the Palisades Fire ignited in bone-dry brush that hadn't seen rain in 8 months, the driest 9-month period in Southern California's recorded history. Within 20 minutes, it exploded from 20 acres to 200, 3 football fields per minute. By sunset, a second monster, the Eaton Fire, roared to life in the San Gabriel Mountains, consuming 10,600 acres by morning. Santa Ana winds screamed through mountain passes at hurricane force, gusting to 100 miles per hour on ridge lines. Embers sailed over a mile through the air, igniting spot fires ahead of the main front. The firestorms raced through Pacific Palisades, Altadena, and Malibu with apocalyptic fury, transforming neighborhoods built in the 1950s. Dense wood-frame homes surrounded by overgrown vegetation into tinderboxes. Water infrastructure collapsed. 20% of fire hydrants ran dry. 3 massive storage tanks emptied before dawn. And overhead, the winds were too ferocious for any aircraft to fly. For 16 critical hours, the fires burned unchallenged from above, while 200,000 people evacuated and thousands of structures ignited. When the Palisades Fire suddenly reversed direction Friday night, threatening to explode into Brentwood and Encino, only 8 helicopters could attempt night operations. Buffeted so violently by updrafts and downdrafts, they could barely hold position. This wasn't just California's problem anymore. This was the most intense, complicated airborne firefight in US history, and it demanded the biggest aerial weapon in America's arsenal. She wasn't born for this. The DC-10 air tanker began life as a passenger jet, one of McDonnell Douglas's wide-body Trijet workhorses, shuttling travelers for Northwest Airlines across continents at 39,000 feet in climate-controlled luxury. But that comfortable life ended in the early 2000s when 10-tanker air carrier saw something nobody else did, the bones of a firefighting titan. The transformation was surgical and savage. Every passenger seat ripped out, all 270 of them. Interior walls stripped to bare fuselage. Then came the real engineering. 3 massive external belly tanks bolted to reinforced mounting points beneath the fuselage, each custom fabricated to hold a combined 9,400 gallons of fire retardant. That's 84,600 pounds of thick, red chemical suppressant, equivalent to carrying 54 cars strapped to your undercarriage. The tanks hung just 15 inches from the tarmac when full, streamlined to minimize drag, interconnected to prevent catastrophic weight shifts, and fed by gravity through computer-controlled dump doors. But the real power lived in the tail. 3 General Electric CF650C2 turbofan engines, 2 under the wings, 1 embedded in the vertical stabilizer, each generating between 51,000 and 54,000 pounds of thrust. Combined output, 162,000 pounds of raw, screaming force. That's the equivalent of 81 tons constantly shoving this aircraft forward, giving it something critical that smaller fire tankers couldn't dream of: the ability to dive into hell, release its payload, and climb back out even while descending through smoke-choked canyons at full weight. The numbers told the story. Wingspan, 165 feet. Length, 182 feet. Cruise speed, 587 miles per hour. But the drop specs revealed its unique lethality. Operating altitude of just 200 to 300 feet above ground, traveling at 170 miles per hour, the DC-10 could dump its entire load in 8 seconds, creating a retardant line 300 feet wide and 1 mile long. One pass equaled 12 drops from a Grumman S2 tracker. And unlike smaller tankers maxed out on performance, this beast operated at 40% below its certified maximum takeoff weight, giving it absurd safety margins and climb rates that defied its size. By 2025, with the Boeing 747 supertanker retired to cargo duty, the DC-10 held the crown, the world's largest operational turbofan firefighting aircraft. 4 ships in the fleet: Tanker 910, 911, 912, and 914. And on January 8th, when dawn finally broke over Los Angeles with conditions calm enough to fly, 2 of them launched from Norton Air Force Base toward the Palisades Fire. Behind the controls of Ship 912, Captain RK Smithley, age 65, a third-generation firefighter from Tennessee with 10 years flying this exact aircraft. His first-hand assessment was stark. My gut reaction was, it's a nightmare. The DC-10's 3 CF6 engines roared to life at 7 a.m. Friday, turbines spooling up with a shriek that rattled windows across the base. Smithley advanced the throttles and felt 162,000 pounds of thrust compress him into his seat as 420,000 pounds of aircraft and retardant accelerated down the runway. Rotation, liftoff. The tanker clawed skyward, climbed to altitude, then turned toward the smoke column visible from 50 miles away, a churning black pillar that rose 10,000 feet into the morning sky. The scene below resembled a war zone, entire neighborhoods reduced to ash, thousands of structures still burning, and flames racing up hillsides toward communities not yet evacuated. But here's what the DC-10 couldn't do: just charge in and start dropping. Federal regulations required large air tankers to follow a lead plane, a smaller, nimble aircraft that would mark the target with smoke, scout the approach, and guide the heavy bomber through the safest corridor. In conditions like these, with crosswinds whipping through canyons and turbulence strong enough to flip helicopters, that guidance was survival. Smithley throttled back, descended to drop altitude, and locked onto his lead plane as it dove toward Pacific Palisades. The cockpit filled with smoke, visibility dropped to fractions of a mile. Wind shear hammered the airframe. Through the windscreen, a canyon choked with flames and a ridgeline critical to holding the fire's advance. The lead plane's smoke trail marked the target. Smithley aligned, dropped lower, 150 feet now, and felt the DC-10 shake as updrafts from superheated air slammed the belly. His flight engineer called out parameters: airspeed, altitude, tank pressure building. The dump doors were armed. "We're threading needles," Smithley would later say. "Going straight down the side of a mountain. We yank and bank it around like a fighter." At the precise moment, the flight engineer punched the release. 84,600 pounds of retardant exploded from the belly in a pressurized torrent, 1,100 gallons per second screaming out through 3 tank doors. The DC-10 lurched upward as if kicked by a giant, suddenly 85,000 pounds lighter. The nose pitched. Smithley hauled back on the yoke, firewall throttle, and those 3 turbofans howled as they shoved the aircraft into a steep climb away from the ridgeline. Behind them, a mile-long crimson wall now stood between the fire and the homes beyond, but there was no time to admire the work. Smithley banked hard, vectored back toward Norton, and landed 12 minutes later where ground crews were already pumping the next 9,400 gallons into the empty tanks. 15 minutes. Wheels up again, back into the smoke. Friday and Saturday blurred into a savage rhythm. Launch, thread through smoke, drop, climb, return, reload, repeat. Smithley flew 4 missions Friday, 6 on Saturday, more than a dozen sorties totaling over 175,000 gallons of retardant painted across hillsides, ridgelines, and directly ahead of advancing flame fronts. Each drop was identical in procedure, but unique in terror. The winds didn't relent. Gusts still hit 60 to 70 miles per hour, creating invisible turbulence that slammed the DC-10 like a fist. Updrafts, downdrafts, crosswinds that tried to shove the aircraft sideways during the critical seconds when it was low, slow, and dropping. There was no autopilot for this, no precision instruments, just Smithley's hands on the yoke, eyes on the windscreen, and 15 years of experience translating wind buffets and engine feedback into micro-corrections. Another pilot, Captain Diego Calderoni, described it as feeling the force, flying by instinct when your altitude is measured in hundreds of feet and your margin for error is 0. On one run, Calderoni threaded his DC-10 into a canyon where ground firefighters were pinned between a 60-foot wall of flame and the homes they were defending. He dropped his load between the crews and the fire, buying them breathing space. The house survived. But the biggest threat wasn't fire. It was something far stupider. Saturday afternoon, Smithley was inbound for another drop when something flashed past his left wing, close enough to see clearly, too fast to react. A drone. Some civilian with a camera and Instagram ambitions had flown an illegal quadcopter directly into the fire traffic area, oblivious or indifferent to the fact that 50 aircraft were operating in a congested airspace smaller than most cities. If drones fly, we can't, Smithley explained, fury barely contained. It's an axiom in aerial firefighting. A drone strike could punch through a windscreen, destroy an engine, or sever a control line. One hit and a 420,000-pound aircraft becomes a ballistic object above a populated area. That Saturday alone, 17 drones were reported in the fire zone. 17 times, all aerial operations halted while authorities tried to locate and stop the idiot with the remote control. The worst came Sunday. A Canadian CL-415 Super Scooper, one of the most capable water bombers in the world, collided with a drone that punched a fist-sized hole in its wing leading edge. Grounded immediately. Every other aircraft pulled back for 30 minutes while responders swept the area. 30 minutes when fires burned unchecked. 30 minutes when homes that could have been saved were lost. All because someone wanted footage. Smithley didn't mince words. People flying drones because they want pictures for Instagram and Facebook are jeopardizing our lives. It's unacceptable. Get the drones out of there so we can do our jobs. The DC-10's systems were screaming. Not failing, screaming. Every component operating at the bleeding edge of its design envelope for hours without rest. The CF6 engines cycled from cruise power to max thrust dozens of times per day. Surge protectors working overtime to prevent compressor stalls when throttles slammed forward during post-drop climbs. Hydraulic pumps maintained pressure for control surfaces that were being thrown through extremes that would never happen in commercial service. The airframe itself, originally certified to 30,000 flight cycles over decades, was enduring stress concentrations in a single weekend that rivaled months of normal operations. Fuel systems worked double duty, feeding 3 massive turbofans while managing center of gravity shifts as 9,400 gallons of retardant, far denser than fuel, sloshed in belly tanks. Flight engineers monitored baffling systems that prevented catastrophic weight shifts during turns. Temperature gauges tracked brake assemblies that were absorbing the energy of landing a 335,000-pound aircraft post-drop weight repeatedly without time to fully cool. As one CAL FIRE officer described it, "You're at maximum performance the entire time. Max power. Everything is maxed out. And if anything went wrong, an engine failure, a hydraulic loss, a control surface jam, there was no altitude to trade for time, no airspeed cushion to maneuver. You were 200 feet up, 170 miles per hour, in a 182-foot jet, surrounded by smoke, wind, and terrain." The DC-10's triple-engine redundancy and 40% weight margin were the only things standing between mission success and catastrophe. Yet the machine held, mission after mission, drop after drop. Ship 9-12 and its sister tankers absorbed punishment that would humble smaller aircraft and kept flying. The retardant lines they painted across hillsides Friday held into Sunday, walls of chemical suppressant that slowed the fire's advance long enough for ground crews to dig containment lines and reinforce defenses. By Sunday, the worst was over, not contained. Fires still burned, hotspots still flared, but the crisis edge had dulled. The retardant walls held. Ground crews had breathing room, and the DC-10s stood down, engines cooling on the ramp at Norton Air Force Base, retardant residue staining their bellies like war paint. Smithley's final accounting for the weekend: more than 175,000 gallons dropped, dozens of homes saved, multiple containment lines established, 0 accidents, 0 casualties among air crews despite operating in the most dangerous conditions American firefighting pilots had ever faced. Across both fires, aerial tankers had delivered millions of gallons. But the DC-10s, with their massive payload, speed, and ability to operate in conditions that grounded smaller aircraft, had done the work of entire squadrons. One drop equaled 12 from legacy tankers. One aircraft could cover more than a mile of fire front in 8 seconds. And unlike helicopters limited to 700-gallon buckets and vulnerable to high winds, the DC-10 could punch through moderate turbulence, deliver its payload with precision, and climb back out even when descending through smoke. The statistics were staggering but told only part of the story. Palisades Fire, 23,448 acres burned, 6,837 structures destroyed. Eaton Fire, 14,021 acres, 9,414 structures destroyed. Over 16,000 homes lost in total. The second and third most destructive wildfires in California history, burning simultaneously. 31 lives lost, 200,000 evacuated. And yet, the devastation could have been exponentially worse. Friday night, when the Palisades Fire reversed course and threatened to explode into Brentwood and Encino, neighborhoods with tens of thousands of additional structures, aerial firefighters held the line. 8 helicopters through the night. DC-10s at dawn. The fire grew by approximately 1,000 acres instead of tens of thousands. The DC-10 air tanker never asked to be a hero. It was built to carry vacationers to Hawaii and businessmen to Frankfurt, cruising at 39,000 feet in air-conditioned serenity. Passengers sipping drinks and watching movies while 3 CF6 turbofans droned in the background. But when 10-tanker air carrier saw potential in aging passenger jets and transformed them into aerial firefighting titans, they created something irreplaceable: the world's largest operational firefighting aircraft, capable of delivering payloads that smaller tankers could only dream of while operating in conditions that would ground half the fleet. In January 2025, a month when these aircraft should have been in maintenance, when fires should have been impossible, when Los Angeles faced a perfect storm of drought, Hurricane-force winds and infrastructure failure. The DC-10s answered the call. They flew when helicopters couldn't. They dropped when smaller tankers had exhausted their loads. They threaded through canyons where 182 feet of aircraft had no business fitting, and they did it dozens of times, for days, until the nightmare began to recede. Captain RK Smithley, exhausted after the most intense weekend of his career. The real heroes are the guys and gals on the ground, the firefighters we're there to support. But I can't stress enough how much of an orchestrated team effort it is. But when you need to drop 85,000 pounds of retardant between firefighters and a 60-foot wall of flame, when you need to paint a mile-long chemical barrier across a ridgeline in 8 seconds, when you need an aircraft that can dive to 150 feet through smoke and climb back out on raw thrust alone, there's only one machine that can do it. The DC-10 air tanker, Ship 912, the 162,000-pound titan that turned passenger jet DNA into firefighting legend. The aircraft that doesn't just battle wildfires, it overwhelms them with scale, precision, and 3 screaming turbofans that refuse to quit. In the war against fire, this is the heavy artillery. And Los Angeles would have burned far worse without it.